Looking for a quick, adorable holiday project that your pet can wear? Or maybe you want them to be the star of every family photo this season. Well, this is the project for you. Hi, I'm Christina, and I love creating fun sewing projects, especially ones that can make our pets stand out and look extra cute. If you want the pattern for this adorable pet elf collar, you can grab it right below this video. And if you'd like to see more holiday projects, pet accessories, or even some digital pattern drafting tutorials, make sure to hit that like and subscribe. It really helps me know what to create next and what you are loving. All right, let's go ahead and get started creating this fun, festive elf collar for your pets. We're going to start by cutting out our pattern pieces, and I'm going to use my projector and patternprojector.com. If you have not used patternprojector.com and have a projector, I highly recommend you checking it out. It's super quick and super easy. All you have to do is calibrate a grid. You can choose the size of the width and the length that you want to match up on your grid, on your table, on your cut mat, and then it is ready for you to bring up your pattern and get cutting. It's that fast. Once I have it calibrated in, I am going to bring up my pattern and start cutting. When I'm working with points like this, I like to give myself a stitch line that I can follow as a guide. So I'm going to use this tracing paper to trace out my stitch line and cut line. This tracing paper I got from Richer the Thread, and it is a super useful tool. I would highly recommend if you're ever interested in tracing out your stitch lines. I'm going to put one piece of paper on the bottom, and I'm going to do a reversible collar. So one side's going to be green, one side's going to be red. So I'm going to lay my green fabric down, then my red fabric, and then I'm going to lay down another piece of tracing paper. That way I can have my stitch line on the top and on the bottom. Once I have them, I'm going to trace it out using a tracing wheel. I'm going to go all the way around so that I have my stitch lines and I know where I'm going to be sewing. I am tracing out both my stitch line and my cut line because that's going to make it faster for me to cut out this project. Once I have it fully traced out, I'm going to remove my tracing paper and I'm going to cut out my pattern. And there we have it. I'm all cut out. It's time to move over to the sewing machine and begin. I'm going to first pin my pieces together so that they don't move on me while I am sewing. When using a stitch line like this, I always recommend checking to make sure your pins are going through the stitch line on both the top pattern and on the bottom pattern so that you know everything is correct. Once everything is pinned, I'm going to move over to my sewing machine and I'm going to start sewing. I'm going to first start by sewing all around each one of the points. So I want to backstitch at this first corner that I have here. Backstitching at corners helps create a little bit extra firmness, a little bit extra thickness, so that when you clip to that corner, your stitching holds stronger. Then I'm going to stitch all the way down the one side. I'm going to do a single stitch across the point of the pattern. I like to do a single stitch across the point of the pattern because when I'm flipping it, it gives a little bit more space for the fabric to flip inside to, and you can get crisper points when you do this. I'm then going to stitch up the rest of that pattern, and again at the very top do a single stitch across because it's going to help let the pattern release when you clip and turn it. Then I'm going to repeat for the other points in this pattern. Once I am all the way around, I'm going to go ahead and backstitch at the end, clip my threads. Then I'm going to do the round neckline part of this collar. Backstitch at the end and clip my threads. Next, I am going to trim away my pattern pieces. I want to clip all of my concave points, and I want to trim my fabric down to a nice tiny seam allowance at every point. This is going to get the bulk out of all of those points and make it easier to flip and then crisp out each one of those points. So I always like to cut all the way around, trimming away that seam allowance. Once the seam allowance is trimmed away, I like to go and clip into each one of those corners. You want to clip to and not through those threads. If you accidentally clip through those threads, go back to your sewing machine now and restitch that corner. Then the last thing I'm going to do is I'm going to trim to an 1/8 inch all around that curve. You can also clip into this. It doesn't matter which way you do it. You can either trim it to an 1/8 of an inch or you can clip into it to release it, whichever feels better to you. Once all the trimming and clipping is done, it's time to flip it right side out. I'm going to use a safety pin on one edge. I'm going to pin it on, then I'm going to start feeding that safety pin through. Flipping a collar like this with a safety pin is the fastest way for me to get this collar flipped right. As I work through, I am kind of manipulating the fabric, twisting it a little bit as I am pulling that safety pin through, which is pulling one end of the collar through. And these points, they're not going to come out easily, so we're going to have to deal with those in a minute. There we go. We are now all flipped, and I'm going to pull out each one of those points as best as I can before I use a chopstick or a point turner to get them nice and crisp. I do have my point turner here, and it looks like it's going to be just big enough that I won't be able to use it, so I'm going to have to use a chopstick. I'm going to use a pencil. You don't normally have a chopstick that I use, but I can't seem to find it right now. This move has made it a little bit crazy here. So I'm going to use a pencil, and I'm going to feed my pencil in and make sure each one of those points gets nice and pointed. Now, you don't want to push too hard to push the pencil through, but you also want to make sure that you get a really nice crisp look. And once I'm done with one point, I'm going to keep moving and do the next. And do the same until I have all the points nice and crisp. If it becomes too hard from one way to be using the pencil to get all the points pointed, go ahead and flip sides, and then you can more easily get to the points on the opposite side. Once they're all pointed out, I'm going to lay them flat and give them all a really good iron. This is going to help when I'm sewing to make sure everything looks nice and crisp and help move stuff faster. While I'm ironing, I'm also going to flip my two raw edges to the inside because I'm going to be adding in a ribbon at both of these places. So I'm going to flip them just to the inside using the 1/2 inch seam allowance I know is there and give them a really good press. Now, there are a couple different ways that you can close this fun elf collar. If you know you have the exact right size, you can just sew a snap right onto the edges right here as they overlap. However, if you're not 100% sure on the size of your dog's neck and you're doing a little bit of guesswork, I would recommend using some ribbon for the closure. That way you can have it be a little bit looser or a little bit tighter, whichever would work better for the dog. Once I have everything ironed, I'm going to move back over to my sewing machine and I'm going to top stitch around my entire collar. This is an optional step. You don't have to do this, but it can make the collar last a little bit longer, look a little bit nicer. You could use some contrasting thread, so you could use the green on the red fabric and the red on the green and just have some fun contrasting, whichever works best for you. It just helps keep the collar nice and crisp because all pets can be a little bit crazy and you want to make sure it looks good. Now, when you are top stitching these points, your sewing machine might get a little cranky when you are trying to sew to that point. I sometimes like to put a straight pin into the point before I get to the point, sew to the point, flip my fabric, and then that safety pin, I can help guide it back up towards the other leg. Sometimes when there's just that little bit of point at the end, the sewing machine might like to eat it. The feed dogs can't really quite grab onto it to keep it moving. So this can be a really helpful thing to make sure your points look good and your sewing machine doesn't accidentally eat those points. The last thing I'm going to do is top stitch around the collar side. There we go, trim my threads. Now it's time to add on my ribbon closure. Because I'm not 100% sure of my brother's dog's neck, I'm going to use some ribbon so it can be a tie-on elf collar. I'm going to cut my ribbon and I'm going to burn the edges. This is a plastic ribbon, has lots of sparkles on it, it's really cute, but I don't want it to fray. If I take a lighter, I can melt the edges a little bit and I will not have fraying. Once I have my ribbons prepped, it's time to sew them on to the collar. Since I already stitched up my edges, I'm going to top stitch my ribbons onto the very top. I'm going to first put it right side to right side. I'm going to have it going the opposite direction that I'm planning to have it sewn. I'm going to top stitch it on, back stitching a little bit. Then I'm going to flip my ribbon over and sew again. This just gives it a little bit extra strength so that those crazy dog zoomies won't rip off right at that one point. Then I'm going to do the exact same on the other side of the collar for the ribbon closure. As soon as you have the closures on, it's time to try it on your pet. He turned out so cute and so adorable. I love it so much, and it's completely reversible. He can either have the green collar out or the red collar out. Thanks so much for sewing along with me. Don't forget, you can grab the pattern for this project using the link down below. If you enjoyed this tutorial, please make sure to give the video a like and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any of the upcoming sewing projects or see how you can start digitally drafting your own sewing patterns. If you're looking for more cute accessories or other fun makes, I've got plenty of videos waiting for you to go check them out. I look forward to seeing you in some of my other videos. Happy sewing!